So welcome guys to this episode 2 of Chess with Wes. I'm Wesley Falcao. I'm a USCF National Master. USCF is the United States Chess Federation. And I'm also a follower of Christ. And when I play chess, I often relate my spiritual life to chess, and I see spiritual principles at work in chess. And sometimes chess helps me appreciate them even more. So this is what I'm about sharing in this series on Chess with Wes. And in the last lecture, I had an introduction about winning technique and fighting spirit in chess. In this lecture, I'm going to talk about truth in chess. And we'll only be scratching the surface because this is a deep topic, but it's an exciting topic, and I'm really excited to share that with you. So let's get on with it. When I talk about truth in chess, what do I mean by that? So let's suppose that white in this position plays pawn up to g4, and black plays the move e7 to e5. And now white plays pawn to f3. Then black simply slides the queen here to h4, gives a check, and surprisingly that is checkmate already in 2 moves, because the king has no square to escape to, and it's all over. So if you ask me what is the truth of this position, I would say the truth of this position is that black has won the game. It is checkmate. If I move one move back and I go here and I ask myself what is the truth of this position, I would say the truth of this position is that it is completely winning for black, with the assumption, of course, that black will play queen h4. Black will find the best move and make the best move. So the truth of the position is always determined by the objectively best moves in the position. So the truth of this position is that it is completely lost for white after this move. If this move is taken back, then it's not completely lost for white. The objective truth is that this is maybe a slightly inferior position for white because he played on the flanks, whereas black played in the center. Let's look at another example. Suppose white plays pawn to e4 and black plays pawn to e5, symmetrical. And now white goes queen to h5, really aggressive, trying to attack this pawn here on e5. And let's say black plays an absolutely absurd move, king to e7, which is met by queen takes pawn, check. And that's actually, believe it or not, it's checkmate, because the king has no square to run to. All these squares are covered by the queen. Can't move back. The queen's watching that square, and these 2 squares are unfortunately occupied by black's own pieces. So this is checkmate. So again, the objective truth of this position is that it is completely won. It's checkmate, so it's won for white. If you go one move back, the truth of this position is that it is completely winning for white, provided white finds the winning move. If you go even further back, what is the truth of this position? It's not losing for black. It's only losing if black plays this move. But if black plays a fine move like knight to c6, is actually pretty good for black. So the objective truth of this position is that black is just doing fine, so no problems. Okay, let's look at another example. Pawn to e5, knight to f3, pawn to f6, defending this pawn here. It seems like black defended this pawn, which is attacked by this knight, but actually white can just throw in knight takes pawn, take the pawn, surprisingly. And if black takes the knight, then queen comes to h5, gives a check to the king, and also attacks this pawn here on e5. And if, let's say, black blocks the check with g6, then white plays queen takes pawn, check again, and he's also picking up this rook in the corner. So black has to play king to e7 if he wants to save that rook. But now white plays queen takes pawn, check, king f7, bishop c4, check. And now here the best move is d7 to d5, but let's make a slightly or a worse move, king to g6. Queen f5 check. You see the king is being harassed by white's pieces. King goes to the only square. d4 check. Now the check is like this. g5. h4, now threatening pawn takes pawn with check, also threatening bishop takes pawn with check and taking the queen, and there is no defense to both these threats and black is just losing. But where did black lose the game? If we go all the way back, from this point it's already objectively lost. From here to it's still lost after bishop takes pawn, but that is still a more resilient defense than not playing the pawn here at all. But even that is clearly winning for white. So we have to bring our assessment back to this position and say that this position already, because it forces that sequence of moves, is clearly winning for white. Therefore, this should also be clearly winning for white, because white plays the best move here, queen h5, and takes the pawn, and then the whole sequence follows. Go one move back. Now we see that what's the truth of this position? The truth is that if black takes, then he's going to lose really badly. But he doesn't have to take. He can play a move like queen to e7, attacking this knight. And now if white tries the same trick, queen to h5, g6, and if he tries knight takes pawn, with the idea that if he takes, then take the rook here, he has a nasty surprise for him with queen takes pawn check, and then when white stops the check, black takes with the queen, he's won a piece. So white can't try this trick here. He would have to retreat the knight, black would regain his pawn, and white would defend the check. And the truth of this position is that it's not as bad for black as it was in the previous position that we saw with the king all exposed, but nevertheless it is still bad for black. So if we go one move further back, this position, the truth is that this move f7 to f6 is bad for black, and black should not play that move. Okay, so having given that brief intro, I'm gonna show you my first game today, which was played in the year 1999. I was a 13-year-old kid playing an open tournament, and there were open tournaments do not have age restrictions, so anyone can play. A lot of older guys were playing there. There was a young boy, probably 9 or 10 years old, named Vishal Shah. He was already pretty good. He was also playing this tournament, and in this game he was playing me. I was playing white, so I played pawn to e4 and he played pawn to c5, which is the Sicilian defense. Now I played knight to f3, he played pawn to e6. We are just bringing our pieces out. I played d4, which you see is freeing up my pieces to move. He takes the pawn, I take it back. Now he brings this piece out, knight f6, attacks my pawn. I play knight c3, defending my pawn, and knight c6. So both sides are freely moving their pieces out. They're not yet trying to do something concrete, and the position is about equal. I here decided to go for a slightly concrete decision with knight takes knight, pawn takes knight, and now pawn to e5, attacking this knight. And when he moved the knight to the center, well, if he moves it back, then he has wasted a move, because he'd have to remove that knight again for his king to get castled and so on. So it's much better for him to move the knight here, which is what he did. And I played I didn't take this knight, I played the knight to e4. My point is that I want to get a solid grip on this square, d6. Now already my pawn on e5 and my knight on e4 are watching this square. And let's say that later on in the game I managed to trade off this bishop of his for my dark squared bishop, and if these two are swapped off, you see that d6, the square, is even more readily accessible for my knight. What I'll do next is I'll trade this bishop for that knight, and then what I'll be left with is my knight on e4 versus his bishop on a6. And if you say this guy, he is hemmed in by his own pawns, and when you have a piece like that, it's called a bad bishop, because it's blocked by its own pawns. He cannot even come out here. Well, he can sort of, but he's always going to have to watch the fact that bishop can take him on a6. So I'm trying to eliminate this piece for that one and this piece for that one, so that it's my knight versus this guy, and once my knight slides here, it's going to be there permanently on this outpost, as it's called, and have a great position. So that's my idea with the move knight to e4. He played queen c7, which attacks my pawn here on e5, and I defended it with pawn to f4. And now he played queen b6. That's a little strange, because you may ask, okay, why couldn't he play queen b6 directly, right? Why did he waste a move, allow me to strengthen my pawn and then move the queen here? Well, there's a subtle point to it. The point is, when he plays queen c7 and I'm forced to play f4 to defend that pawn, this move, pawn to f4, leaves a hole in my position here on e3. Because you see, if this pawn is here, then it's protecting e3. But once it leaves, there is no more protection on that e3 square, and that's going to be an important factor later on in the game. So he plays queen b6 now. The other thing he's achieved with this pawn move to f4 is that this line has suddenly become open, which means my king cannot castle easily because his queen is watching that square. So it's a really subtle thing which he did with queen c7, forcing that and then playing queen b6. I said, okay, I can still go on with my plan. I'll play pawn to c4 with the idea that this knight is attacked and he'll likely move here with the support of his queen. I don't mind. I'll attack him with my queen again, and then he'll have to take my bishop, and I'll trade him off. And I've already achieved what I wanted to achieve, which is trade off this bishop for that knight. So I was like, great, I don't mind the knight coming in. I can allow that. So I played pawn to c4. And here my opponent hit me with a shock. Bishop b4. Check. Ouch. I did not see that move at all. I had not seen it coming. And the reason this move is so deadly, or it seems to be deadly, is because I cannot make an obvious move like bishop d2, blocking this check. Because now what happens is, this bishop is pinned to its own king on this line, which means that this bishop cannot move here because it would be check. So that allows him to play queen to e3 check in this position, and I cannot take the queen because this bishop is pinned to the king. So then I would have to stop this check with queen to e2, and now he has a forced sequence of moves with bishop takes bishop check first, knight would have to take, queen would take the queen, I would take the queen back, and at the end of it all he wins a pawn with knight takes f4. And I saw all of that. I also saw that this pawn's gonna be weak, and I was not happy about this position at all. I didn't want to go into this position. So I decided I might as well allow my king to be exposed and play king up here, but at least I save my extra pawn and maybe I can still fight. That's what I thought. But I remember making the move and I just left the board. I was probably shaking in fear at that moment because my king was all exposed, and as we saw from the examples earlier, an exposed king is generally not a good idea and it can come under fire. And I went away from the board. I remember meeting a friend and I told him I messed up my position completely and now my king is exposed and so on. I'll stop this story right here and fast forward to something that happened 2 years from that game in 2001. I was playing a completely different opponent. His name was Siddharth Alwaris. This was the state championship, and I had white against Alwaris, and believe it or not, I had the exact same position on the board with queen to b6. But of course I had learned from my previous game, right? Or did I? I played in this game pawn to c4 again, and my opponent immediately had a smile on his face and he played bishop b4 check. Ouch. And now I just stayed there with a poker face. I didn't move. I just looked at the position, waited for a minute, maybe a minute and a half, maybe 2 minutes, and then I played king e2. My opponent was again really excited because he's got my king exposed, and then he says, okay, you're gonna take my knight, but I'm gonna play bishop to a6, pin your pawn so you cannot take, because then it would be check to your own king, and he's threatening to take this pawn already. I said, okay, I calmly moved my king even further up, but to the side, king to f3, now defending that pawn with this bishop. And again, my opponent was really excited because my king is now even further up and he's got me checked and everything, and I'm having a bad position. Or was I having a bad position? Because now, as my opponent finally decided to sit down and think, after all his excitement, the smile on his face slowly began to disappear as he began to realize the truth of this position. And the truth of this position, surprisingly, is that this king on f3 is completely safe, believe it or not. It's safe because none of black's pieces can actually get near the king. This queen would love to jump here and check him, but the bishop's watching that square. The queen would love to jump here, but she cannot jump over all these pawns, so the queen is stuck here. This bishop is not active at all because he's blocked by this pawn. If he moves back here, is blocked by this pawn, so he cannot do anything. This bishop is firing nowhere. The knight is attacked, so his pieces are not able to coordinate themselves against my king. And it began to dawn on him that his position is not as good as he thought it was. And he did play a counter-attacking move. He attacked my knight, trying to get me to move it, but I said no. I took it with en passant. He took it back, and now my counter-attack started with bishop to e3, hitting his queen. Queen drops back. And now I see that his threat in this position is to take this knight and force my king even further up. So I'm like, nah, I'm not going to give you that. Knight takes f6. Pawn takes knight. And again, I had a thought, this is probably as far as I had already prepared after my analysis of the first game. When I went home and in the course of the next few months, when I finally got a new computer to use the computer to analyze my games, I had studied this position and arrived at the truth of this position, which is that this is completely fine for for white. And so I was not afraid going into this position. And now here is probably where my analysis came to an end, but I knew that this is good for white. So I began to think, and I said, okay, I can move this bishop out here, and let's draw some arrows. Maybe I can move this rook here, and then I can bring my king out here and bring him to safety. But then black has also got a plan. Black can play a pawn from here to here, then he can move this bishop here, and then this bishop will be firing on this long diagonal. Black could also try to immediately open the center with a move like pawn to d5 or e5 later on. So I'm like, that's too slow. I want to make sure that he doesn't get that, because once he gets this, if he manages to get in c5 and gets the bishop going that way, then that bishop would be really dangerous for my king. So I shut that possibility out with pawn to c5. Now if he goes back, then he's stuck against his own pawn. He's also being attacked by my bishop on a6. So he's got few options. He had to trade him. I traded back. And now I achieved the same objective, but with one move less or two moves less. Because now I can go here and here, and it's almost as if I have castled in the position, and my king is completely safe. Meanwhile, his king is still in the center. And let's say he tries to castle here, his bishop's gonna get trapped with pawn to a3, hitting him. He can't take here because I would take him back. You'd have to go here, and then I would trap him with pawn to b4, and he'd be lost. So he cannot even get his king to safety. He has to worry about this guy. So he had to drop it back in this position. And now I played queen up here, threatening to trap him like that, and also threatening to take this pawn. So he stopped both threats with queen to d8, making room for his bishop here. And I brought this rook out here. So you see my pieces are coming out really fast now, after I traded off all his attacking pieces. And when your opponent doesn't have attacking pieces left, your king is becoming safer and safer by the day. And the rest of this game is not relevant to our discussion about truth, but for the sake of completeness, I want to show you how this game ended. So he cannot yet castle because then this pawn would be dropping. My rook and queen are both attacking, so he needs his king to watch this. So he played queen here so that he could bring this rook here, defend it, and then castle, or maybe castle this way. But now I thought, okay, I need to open up the position while his king is still in the center, so I played pawn to f5. He didn't take the pawn, he didn't want his position to be open up, so he played bishop here, and I took this pawn. Now he should have taken with the queen, but he was too afraid to do that, because now if he does that, then the queen and king are on the same line, and one of my rooks could get here and start to create real problems for his queen. So he was afraid to do that, and he played pawn takes pawn. But that was a mistake, because it allowed me to play queen here, attacking this guy, and now he cannot defend that pawn. Because if he does this, then I just take his queen, right? So he resigned himself to losing this pawn, and he played rook here. I took the pawn, king f7, and now I see that his bishop is firing down this line, so I played pawn to g3, stopping that, and also creating room for my king to come out here and hide here in the corner maybe, or just on g2 is fine. So he played bishop here, attacking this guy. I just moved it forward, because now my plan is to get these pawns rolling, because I have 3 versus 1 majority here. When you have a majority, you can start pushing your pawns and getting them closer to the queening square. And he was looking for counterplay, and his best chance was to trade these rooks, which is what he did, so that now he can enter my position with his queen and start checking my king and so on. I gave a check here just to also watch this guy, king g8, and now I stopped his threats of queen checks with king e2, so now I control both these squares. And here he should have played queen here, trying to enter like this into my position, but unfortunately he didn't see that, and he thought my pawn's hanging here, white can push here, so he played queen c7, offering a trade of queens, which I was really happy to do so, because now that just allows me to start pushing my pawns even more easily with his queen not being around to defend. And now the game is pretty much over. He tried to bring his king to help, but my pawns are just too fast. Take, defended by this bishop here, so he has to go back, and now my pawn is faster than his king. And pawn to a7. Now I'm threatening to queen, also threatening to take his bishop. So you'd have to sacrifice this bishop here, but then I'm threatening to queen again, so his king would have to come here, and now this pawn is protected by my own piece. So his king is tied to the defense of this pawn going here, and my king can start to mop up all these pawns and then start pushing my own pawns on the king side and win the game. So in this position, when I played a7, he resigned the game because he saw all of that coming, and it was over. Now going back to this position, I want you to see the contrast between the first game and the second game. In the first game, I didn't know the truth about this position. I can say that I knew the partial truth about this position. The partial truth is that my king is exposed. True. Generally speaking, an exposed king is bad. True. But in this case, it is not. And that's the truth that I was missing. And that's this reason why I was afraid, and I was uncertain, and I was nervous and fearful, because I only knew the partial truth, and that partial truth was misleading because I didn't see the whole picture. And I began to look for defensive moves, and I went on to lose this game because I completely misplayed my position. Whereas in the second game, I came armed with the truth of this position, and I knew exactly who was better in that position. And so I was able to play what I thought at that time was a great game from me, and went on to win very handsomely. And that brings me to my first spiritual principle, which I want to share with you, which is as simple as this. This is something Jesus said: you will know the truth, and the truth will make you free. You see, in that game, in the second game, I knew the truth. I knew the truth of that position. It's good for me. And that freed me to make my moves. It didn't give me any nervous anxiety or fearfulness of what's going to happen. I knew exactly who was better in that position. So I was able to go for it without any kind of problems, even though my king is exposed. And generally an exposed king adds pressure to you. It's a psychological stress that you have to go through to think, my king is exposed, my king is exposed, my king is exposed. But if you know the truth of the outcome of that position, then you can deal with that stress. You can deal with that psychological pressure because you know what the outcome is going to be. And it's similar to what Jesus himself was able to do, because he had to himself go through his own crucifixion on the cross. But it says that for the joy that was set before him, he endured the cross, which means that when he was going through that physical and spiritual suffering, he was looking forward, he was looking ahead to what's beyond this, and he knew that there is joy waiting for me at the end of it all. So that truth gave him the courage and the strength to endure his present state. And that's so true for our life as well, that if we know where we are going, if we know the end goal, and if we know that that is going to give us joy, then we can fight through our sufferings, we can fight through our pain, which is temporary, to get to that objective that we want to get to. The third thing I want to share is, in chess, it's often the case that if you never saw a move coming, like in this case, I never saw this bishop move coming, then you can automatically start to think that that's a good move. I've seen this happen many times with me, that if I see a move that I didn't even expect, I'm kind of like, I'm jolted out of my chair a little bit, especially if it's a check. And then my mind automatically starts to assume that's a good move. And that's a dangerous thing. You gotta watch that, because just because it was an unexpected move, it does not mean that it is a good move or it destroys you. And it's also a spiritual principle which goes like this. And we often heard Jesus said that do not judge, but he actually said, when you do judge, do not judge by appearances, but judge with right judgment. So in that case, in that position, I was judging it by the appearance of that position and not the right judgment about this position. So by appearances, it does look like white is in trouble. And I remember playing this game in 2001, and one of the players of the top board, he came to my board, and when this position appeared on the board, he was having a look at the position. And he is a strong player, so he had a look and he thought about it a little bit, and he didn't judge it by appearances. He began to assess the position on its merits, and later on he told me he saw the position and he said, yeah, I think white was better in that position. And he was spot on, because he was able to correctly assess this position. Okay, now I'm going to show you how this idea of truth applies at the highest levels of chess. I'm going to show you a game between a top grandmaster named Levon Aronian and 5-time world champion Anand. This was played in 2013, and it was a great game by Anand. So let's have a look at that one. Okay. And Anand in this game was, or Anand as he's called in India, was playing black, and Levon Aronian was playing white. So Aronian played d4, Anand played d5, c4, c6, Slav defense. And this is a common opening variation, knight to f3, knight to f6. This pawn can be taken, but then white has ways to recapture that pawn. So at the grandmaster level, they do not always take this pawn. Knight to c3, and Anand decides to not take this pawn. He plays pawn to e6, making sure that his central position is solid here. And white plays pawn to e3, getting ready to move this bishop out, and then castle. black played knight d7, and white played bishop d3. Now you may think, okay, what's happening with this guy here? Because remember, in my first game I showed you that this guy seems to be a bad piece. It's hemmed in by its own pawns. Well, the idea is to bring this pawn up here maybe, and then bring this guy out here, and then move that pawn there. So this bishop from here would have lots of scope on the long diagonal. But at the grandmaster level, they're trying to save every little moment that you can get of time. So for example, what do I mean by that? So let's say in this position, white played pawn takes, black played pawn takes pawn, and white takes bishop with the bishop. Now you could play, instead of pawn to here, you could play here, two moves, two squares, and then bishop d3, and now bishop comes out here. So this move from white was a waste of a move, right? Because it's like he moved it here, then he moved it back. So it's almost as if he moved it here, but then for some reason he went here and went back. So white lost time in that exchange. But there is a there's another optimal way to do it. So you could take here, or you could wait for him to come out first, then take, so that he wastes one more move, and now you can play that. And now Anand could have played bishop here, but he first decided to get his king to safety, so he played bishop d6. But this whole idea is the idea of tempo in chess. You're trying to execute your plan faster than your opponent, so you're trying to make moves that gain time for you to execute your plan, whereas waste your opponent's time. So that's the idea. Okay, castles. Queen comes out here, and now with this is called a battery in chess. With this battery of queen and bishop, he's lining up against this pawn on h7. For now, my knight on f6 is watching it, so it's okay, but that's just a threat that I need, or black needs to watch in this position. So okay, Anand finally brought his piece out to c8, and Aronian played here pawn to a3, which is a prophylactic move. He's trying to prevent this pawn here attacking his knight, and there can be deep consequences to allowing a move like that. For example, I'm gonna show you a random series of moves here. Let's say he didn't play a3, and he played, let's make some random moves like pawn to h3, rook to c8, rook to e1. These are completely random moves, okay? They're not the best moves. Pawn to c5, bishop here, take this pawn, and now pawn to b4. And what we see here is that this rook, which is lined up against the queen, makes this knight immovable, because if the knight moves now to escape this attack, then the rook simply takes the queen. So to prevent that possibility in many different lines, because Aronian knew that Anand's rook was coming here, Aronian played a3 already, making sure that black doesn't have that possibility in any of the variations. So you see how deep grandmasters think. So Anand played rook c8 anyway, because he wants to play this pawn here and take here, and then his rook would be lined up against the queen. Even though he doesn't have that pawn to b4 idea, it's still a good idea to line up your rook against your opponent's queen like that. So Anand played rook c8. Now Aronian increased the pressure on h7 with this knight here. So now he's got 1, 2, 3 attackers, and white has only 2 defenders, the knight and the king. So white is ready to take this pawn. Anand here simply ignored the pawn and played pawn to c5. Amazing. Now, this is a move that Anand had studied a year ago in 2012 for his World Championship match against Boris Gelfand. And during that time, he had spent time with his seconds. They're called people who help you analyze chess positions. He had spent time with his seconds and with the computer, probing this position and seeing all the different ideas and subtleties and combinations in the position. And he had reached the conclusion that this move, pawn to c5, is good for him, even though he lets white capture this pawn. And then it doesn't take much to realize that black shouldn't be capturing this knight here, because that simply allows bishop takes knight check, and then it's white for choice. But the way to get compensation for this is to go after white's king with knight to g4. So Anand played that really quickly. And now this bishop and this knight are hitting that pawn on h2. So white, or Aronian in this case, defended that threat with pawn to f4, cutting off this line of the bishop, because now the pawn is in the way of that bishop. And now here Anand finally began to think, because yes, he had done the preparation a year ago, but he had forgotten all of that. And during this game, he couldn't remember what the ideas were. All he knew, the only thing he knew, was the truth of the position. He just knew that this is supposed to be good for black, and that he had analyzed it a year ago. And that's all that he knew or remembered. And just by that confidence, he was able to go on and play and find the right moves, which he had prepared a long time ago. So in this position, Anand took this pawn, opening this rook on this queen, as we have seen before. Aronian took back. And now it's not easy. It's not easy to find a move for black, because black would want very much to get an attack going here with a move like queen to h4. But then white can kick this knight with pawn to h3, and there is nothing immediate happening for black in this position. So Anand couldn't play that, but he was like, I know there has to be a move because I know the truth of the position. And after an hour, half an hour's thought, he found the move. Bishop to c5. That's astonishing, because he's placing the piece right in front of this pawn who can capture it. So what is that move? Like, what is this? It turns out that if black or white takes this piece, then black can take here with the knight. Now he's attacking this piece with the knight as well as the queen. So he's in trouble. And let's say that white decides to ignore that and instead takes the rook here. Then Anand could play knight takes bishop, or he could first play queen d4 check, hit the king, king comes out here, and now knight takes bishop. And now he's getting ready for all sorts of checks on f2, and that can get really dangerous for white. Let's, for example, play a move like queen to e2 and see what ideas exist in this position. White can play knight d to f2 check, and let's say white goes king to g1. Then he can play knight to h3 with a double check. And when you have a double check, you can only move the king, so move it here. And now Anand would win brilliantly with queen to g1 check, sacrificing his queen, but the rook takes. And now what? Knight to f2 check, and the king is completely smothered, cannot move. And this is called a smothered mate. Yes, the queen could take the knight, but then the other knight joins in, and the smothered mate is complete. So that was the amazing idea with that move. So for that reason, Aronian didn't take this rook here. Well, first of all, Aronian didn't even play pawn takes bishop. But that's one line that could have happened if Aronian had gone into this position. So let's look at one more line there. Here takes. After queen e2, he would give a check here, then white would have to take the knight. Instead of allowing the smothered mate, he'll have to take, and then knight takes. King moves here, knight comes out here, check, king has to go back, and then Anand could take this piece here, and he would have the better position, because now this bishop is firing down this line. This knight's always ready to jump into this square, and this rook is active, his queen is active, material is even, and these pieces haven't yet come out to participate in the game. So black is doing excellent in this position. Nevertheless, this was better than what Aronian chose in the position. Aronian's problem was that he was shocked by this move. He, as I was shocked by that bishop move in the first game, the bishop check. In this case, it's not a check, but it's an even more shocking move, which puts the bishop under attack by an enemy piece. And Aronian took 50 minutes of thought in this position, but I think that he was just psychologically lost. He was disturbed, and he was seeing ghosts, I guess, and he couldn't find a way here. But if he had been himself, he would have realized that white can actually take this piece. Take, yeah, sure. And just play a calm move, pawn to h3. And after a lot of computer analysis in this position, it's found that white is not doing terribly bad in this position. For example, I think the line goes something like queen check, king to h1, and now take here, and black takes the rook, and I guess check here with this knight. Now white would take, black takes back, and the point of this pawn to h3 is now he doesn't get smothered there. He can move here. He has got breathing space for his king, and this position is not terribly bad for Aronian. And if he was in his right mind, he would have found this, and he would have realized that yes, the objective truth of the position is that it is good for white, good for black, but it's not that good for white, and he can still put up a fight. Aronian perhaps thought that the position was much better for white, so he was mentally disturbed, and he played a wrong move here. He played bishop to e2, and now it's Anand's turn. And obviously Anand looked at the most common response here, which would be, or the most practical one, which would be bishop takes pawn check, king moves here, knight checks here, the rook will take it, and bishop takes, and now knight takes here, and black would take this knight back, and the material is again even, and black has a reasonable position. But Anand was not happy. He was a bit surprised that there was only so little in this position, because intuitively he understood that this move, bishop to e2, there was something wrong with it. And maybe he vaguely remembered his analysis and remembered not noting that move, or noting that that was a bad move. So his knowledge of the truth spurred him to look for more in the position, and he played an even more amazing move, knight to e5, sacrificing another piece. So now this guy is hanging, that guy is hanging too. White can take him as well. But the point is, if he takes this knight, then white plays queen takes pawn, check to the king, king has to move, and now we see the smothered mate idea again with queen g1 check, rook takes, and knight f2. It's a beautiful checkmate. So he cannot take this knight. He cannot take the bishop, because then black again has check, king moves here, knight check, he has to take, otherwise smothered mate, takes, and now he's threatening a checkmate here with the queen and bishop. And if black tries to stop it, then first of all he loses his queen here, but second of all it's just mate in a different way, queen e1 check and mate. So he cannot take both pieces, neither can he take here nor can he take there. So what can he do? Well, he took this knight. Okay, and now Anand finally took on d4 check, king moves here, and then took on g4. And he continues his attack. And Aronian took on f8. Now again Anand had a think. He could of course take this knight like this, but that allows Aronian's queen to enter here and start creating problems for his own king. If he takes with the queen, well, that's a little slow, because your queen ideally wants to go here like this and threaten checkmate. The problem is, if he goes here directly, then Aronian had a nice trick for him. Aronian would have played queen h7 check, and also attacking this queen with the defense of this knight. So he would have to take, Aronian would happily trade this queen, and at the end we see that he has a knight for a knight, a bishop for a bishop, and a rook for a bishop. So Aronian is ahead in material in this position. So that would have been a nice escape for Aronian, but Anand saw that. And so in this position, he played an incredible move. He played pawn to f5, cutting off that line. Remember how Aronian played pawn to f4, cutting off the bishop? Well, Anand says, my turn. And he cuts off the queen's access to h7. And now he is threatening to go queen h4 himself. So and this piece is hanging also. So Aronian said, okay, I play here so that I watch this square. Your queen can't get there. But Anand says, okay, I can hit him with queen to f6. And Aronian tried to attack this knight with pawn to h3. But Anand said, no problem, just take it if you want to. Because if he takes, unfortunately, he has opened this line on his king. And now queen to h7 comes. And it's checkmate because this bishop's watching this square. So it's game over. So he cannot take the knight. Aronian played queen e2. And now Anand played queen h5. Now this pawn is defending this pawn. But unfortunately, he is pinned on this line. So if black plays queen takes pawn here, he wouldn't be able to recapture because that opens up his king to this bishop. So black is actually threatening to take this pawn here with check. So Aronian, for that reason, played queen here, defending this pawn like that, so that if queen takes, then now he would take with the queen. But now Anand played a nice cheeky move, bishop to e3, cutting off this line with this bishop, and Aronian resigned. Because if he takes this bishop with the queen, then of course Anand takes the queen. And if he takes it with the bishop, then well, queen takes pawn, check, cannot take because of the pin, king has to move here. And then he has a choice of queen h2 checkmate with this knight, or he's got a choice of queen takes g2 checkmate with this bishop. And that would have been the end of the game. So Aronian in this position resigned the game. So what do we learn from this? We learn that it's important to know the truth, and knowing the truth makes you free to make the moves. It helps you to look for good moves because you know something good must be there, and it gives you the confidence to go into a difficult situation and be like, yes, I can find my way here because I know something good is going to come out of it. And to end this presentation, I want to show you an interview of Anand and Aronian after this game, which was played in 2013. So I've pulled it up here. I'm gonna move my video here, and let's go to the relevant section. I think it starts at around 2 minutes. And let's play the video.
Good for black. He went f4, and to be honest, I was trying to remember the details.
He was trying to remember the details.
So I spent about half an hour here, which is...
You see, he couldn't remember. He had to recalculate everything.
strange if you think, of course, it's a preparation, of course, it was a while back. And there are just a lot of details, and I wanted to make sure I didn't forget anything. So, but this bishop c5 is good. The point is after dc5, knight c5, there's nothing white can do. He can play queen e2, queen d4 check, king h1, knight takes d3, queen takes g4, king takes h7. And now, for instance, queen g3, king g, sorry, that's not necessary. Rook fd8 or a6, and black just is doing excellently. But that was the best, I mean, even bishop e2. And I was a bit surprised.
You catch that? He was surprised. I think intuitively he knew that there was something wrong with that move. So he was looking for more.
Because, I mean, I think black is, I mean, at least this was what I thought of the board. I thought black was doing excellently here as well, because he will continue with queen h4 and play bishop g3 or something. But then I started to think about knight d5.
So this was the point that you still remembered the prep, or was this as far as the preparation went?
Well, I don't remember exactly how. I only remember the position is supposed to be fine for black, so I was only playing on that confidence. Well, obviously it's a big help knowing that something is good. Yeah.
It's a big help knowing that something is good, which is the point I've been trying to make, and Anand makes it explicitly here. Let's look at Aronian's interview after this.
Levon, what happened?
Yeah, I think I've got in a theoretical trap because I was not aware of this because bishop c5 is very strong. Yeah.
Bishop c5 is very strong, but is it? That was the impression that he had, and I thought he got that conclusion, I guess, on the first impression. Maybe I'm wrong, but maybe there's something psychological about the shock value of that move. And that's probably what happened to him. And now he says he spent 50 minutes on that.
And Vishy said that he had prepared it for somebody else. So, yeah, I mean, I should study openings better.
After bishop c5, you thought for about 50 minutes. What all were you thinking at that moment?
I thought if I play knight g5, then he just takes, and knight df6, I'm worse. Okay, I thought bishop e2. I actually forgot about knight d5, but I saw all the moves are leading to a worse position for me, and I thought, alright, maybe perhaps this is the move, but then knight d5 comes, and yeah, black is easily winning. So probably if I had seen knight e5, I would take on c5 and play queen e2, but there I'm just worse, because the bishop on b7 is such a monster.
Thank you.
So there you go. That was Anand and Aronian in the interview after the game. So in this episode 2, we have only just started looking at the idea of truth in chess, and there's so much more that we can explore, and I would love to do that in the coming lectures, especially things like how do we go about exploring truth in chess position, and how do we arrive at the truth of a chess position. So that's something that I want to do in future lectures. But I hope you enjoyed this one, and now I would like to open it up to any questions that you may have. No questions, Corey?
I'm talking to Dominic now.
Yeah.
Did you learn anything from the matches, Dominic? He's very shy on camera. He does not want to speak.
Okay.
But I found it very insightful how you did the different matches, and what went through your mind spiritually, and then you went through the YouTube videos where you showed the opponents. Were those people you actually played with ever, or?
No, I haven't had a chance to play these grandmasters. They're too good for me. But I hope to. I hope to play them someday. But they're one of them is a 5-time world champion. The other one, Levon Aronian, he has been in the world championship contention for a long time, but never really got a shot at the world championship. But these two are like the absolute cream of chess. Or they were, at least at that time. Nowadays there is a few younger folks who are stronger, but yeah.
And then when you went through the whole game that you played, did you go through from were these actual games that you played, like from beginning to end, that you went through today?
Yeah, I mean, the first 2 games that I showed you, those were my games when I was a 13-year-old and 15-year-old. And this second one, this last one that I showed you was the Aronian and Anand game. But it's always good to relate what you have seen with the experience of much stronger players. And I think Anand's game illustrates the point even more than my game. But at the same time, I don't want to discuss games which people are already aware of. And I think that this is a game that people are already aware of, but I wanted to tie it to the concept of truth, which I had already seen in my game. So I think it's fair to also include some high quality games such as this one. So yeah.
So what are you hoping to achieve with this series? Like, what was it, episode 1, and why did you pick Truth in Chess for episode 2?
Yeah, so I want to share my faith, and because it's a part of who I am, and I feel like I can reach people in the chess community and be like, hey, look at this, that there's things I see in chess which are so true even in our spiritual life, and I don't know of anyone else who has done that. So I feel like since I see these things, I should be sharing about them, and who knows who might find it helpful. So that's the idea with this series. And and how the content was put together, well, it honestly, I had some ideas, but okay, I thought, how do I put them all together in the form of episodes? So it made sense to me to have the first episode about some basic winning technique in chess, which a lot of times is simply assumed that you know it. And if you watch my YouTube video on the first lecture, you will see what that technique is. But it's not often talked about as much. But I thought I should do a series or at least an episode on that one, so that you have some idea of, okay, this is how you go about winning a game after you have got, let's say, a material advantage. And then, since the example that I had was also related to fighting spirit, I thought, okay, I'd include fighting spirit as part of the first lecture. And then the second one, truth, well, there's many ideas that I want to share, but then I was like, I think it makes sense to talk about truth, because that's such an important factor in chess, the truth of a position. And there's other things such as the truth of a player. I mean, the position might be just fine, but you might not be the right guy to play that position. And that's something that I want to explore in further lectures, because sometimes there are positions which are objectively they are good, but subjectively for you they might not be, because you're not a computer and you cannot always find the best moves. So that's the plan, and who knows what other themes I may do. Of course, I've collected some material, but it's not fully organized right now. So I'm just taking it one lecture at a time, and I don't know how many I can do, but I think I can do at least 2 more, and let's see how many more I can do.
Okay. Let us know where we can find episode 1, because I think I missed that. So I'd love to see the fighting spirit episode.
Yeah.
And then what is, you said you're planning 2 or 3 more?
At least 2 more. But I think I might do 2 or 3. I don't know. It depends on how much content I think I still have to share. So yeah, it's just completely dependent on that. But I should be doing one soon, if not next week, the week after for sure. Yeah.
Now, how do we find your YouTube channel?
My YouTube channel is if you search for Chess with Wes on YouTube, you'll find me with my profile picture. Oh. So you should be able to easily. My channel is called Chess Revelation, and if you search for
I'm really into this Queen's Gambit show. Can you tell me a little bit more about how you can cover different aspects of each of the books discussed in that series in your Chess with Wes?
Well, actually, surprisingly, I haven't actually watched the Queen's Gambit, because last year when it came out, I was more busy with actual chess than watching TV shows, and I think that's. I looked at it as just another TV show, which would be more entertainment than actual chess. And that's honestly, that I found that to be true with what the videos that I saw of the actual games that were played in the Queen's Gambit series. So it's more about exploring the personality of the player and all of those things, which are more for entertainment than learning chess as such. So I haven't actually watched the Queen's Gambit, but I've seen some of the games that were played in the Queen's Gambit, so I have some idea. And there were games that had...
The books as well, I would love to hear more about your views on the books that were discussed in that series. And also, it's a Women's Month, so I have to ask you, because the Queen's Gambit was a great show that brought a lot of women into chess. So I'd like to explore maybe your thoughts on how you can make this series also, maybe have a focus on how do you bring, like my daughter Amelia is 10 years old, like how do we bring her into the fold, whereas my 13-year-old boy is naturally interested in chess, right? So just some thoughts on Women's Month as well in March, and how you can bring chess to, whole, other half of the planet as well.
Well, I know, I the way I look at it is that if someone naturally likes something, then let them follow it. But if they don't naturally like something, I think it's a bad idea to push it on them. So because I have seen this in India, I've seen an unfortunate case where I saw a 4-year-old kid who, for his age, my God, he was playing some chess. I saw it when he came. Of course, he couldn't beat me, but I saw him play and I was like, wow, for a 4-year-old, you're doing really well. But I think what happened with him was his parents became too pushy on the chess, because they wanted him, I guess they wanted him to become world champion. And it backfired on him, because for him, chess became a chore rather than something that he enjoyed. And later on, when I saw him when he was 11 or 12, I didn't even think that he was as strong as I was at the same age. So I was like, wow, that was a disaster for this kid. So for that reason, I'm like, if someone's not naturally inclined to chess, then it may be a good idea to not be like, get yourself into chess. It may just be a good idea to just keep playing chess around them and see if, they pick interest for it. I think that's what my dad did with me. He didn't force me to sit down and play chess. He just one day just brought a chess set, and I was like, what is this? I was automatically curious, and he's like, it's a new game. And then I wanted to know what the game was all about, and something about that game, I guess it's the pieces or whatever, it caught my attention. And I was a 4-year-old when I learned. So I guess that with any other activity, it's important to people to have like a natural interest. Like if it comes naturally, that's great. Whereas if you try to force the interest, then you can get into dangerous territory. Again, I don't claim to know the truth of this matter, but at least that's my subjective experience. So yeah, that's what I would say.
That's good to know, because I was watching the Queen's Gambit and I was hoping to make it into like a fashion show for my daughter, so she's interested, because there was a lot of nice fashion displayed in the Queen of Gambit, because a TV show cannot just be about chess,
Yeah.
So I think there's a lot of ways we can bring chess into a more modern and fashionable society. For some reason, if I show you my yearbook picture, I am somehow featured in the chess club, even though I hardly can remember anything about chess.
So Corey, by the way, this is being recorded, so just so you know.
I know.
Yeah,
That's why I'm trying to make it humorous for you, for your viewers.
Yes, okay.
So, I am, very happy to see you doing this, and hopefully you can bring chess to a greater audience.
Yeah, thank you.
But I'm very interested in the Queen's Gambit, so you can throw a little bit more in there about the books that they discussed. For example, what is the book, Dominic, that they talked about with the janitor in the Queen's Gambit? What? The openings? Chess openings, right? What, Chessable? Yeah, the book that she was reading with the janitor.
I can look them up.
It was Chess Openings is the book.
Okay, there's so many books. And the books that she was reading at that time that's based in like the 1970s, right? As far as I understand, 1960s or 1970s. The books at those that they would be reading at that time would not be useful for today's audiences or today's kids, especially because chess has evolved a lot since that time, and a lot of new openings and new ideas have been discovered since the 60s and 70s. So I would
think it's the classical moves.
Sure, yeah, right? But even so, there's a lot of new books that have been written that explore the classics in much better way and more accessible ways than some of those older books might have done. So
why don't you tell me one or two that I should start with? Since this is being recorded, I think. Yeah,
I'd recommend an old book, but it's still a good book, and I think if I remember correctly, it's called The Most Instructive Games of Chess Ever Played. I think that's one of the first books that I came across, and my understanding of chess improved greatly after reading the book. I think it's by this author named Irving Chernev or something. Let me Google it. Yes, Irving Chernev, The Most Instructive Games of Chess Ever Played. I think that's a really good book. But it also depends on how much you understand chess already. So if you're just starting out, maybe that book is a little high level for you. And
I would say beginners, like something that you don't. Almost like what you're saying, like chess as a life lesson, like with a little bit of philosophy and not just like A5 and, whatever squares you're talking about.
Yeah.
Like more of a philosophy.
Yeah, the thing is, I haven't read that many chess books myself. I have self-taught myself through...
This is recorded and you're admitting this on a YouTube recording.
No, that's all right because, I grew up in an environment where I didn't...
I'm just kidding.
No, I mean, I grew up in an environment where I didn't have access to a lot of chess material. I didn't even have a good computer to analyze my games with until I was like 14 or 15 years old. So my development as a chess player was not as fast for that reason, I think. I didn't have much exposure, but I think that set me on the path of discovering things for myself. And I would just learn from my own games most of the time. But here and there, I would find a book which I would read and learn something from. So I would say pick up a book like, How to Beat Your Dad at Chess. It's a nice tactics book which shows you different types of chess tactics. And doesn't have any philosophy in it, but it has some tactics in there that you can learn and sort of entertain yourself. If you're really looking for some philosophy sort of stuff, then I had read this book called Anyone for Chess, and that has some interesting stuff. It's a pretty interesting read. Anyone for Chess, and who was the author of that book?
You mean it says Chess for Anyone?
No, Anyone for Chess by Andre Launay. You can see it on Amazon. Anyone for Chess. That's a pretty entertaining book. I must say that's an entertaining book. For someone who is just getting into chess, I think that's quite entertaining. So yes, I had that one, so I would recommend that one. Yeah.
Anyone for Chess?
Yeah, Anyone for Chess.
Huh.
You see that? Anyone. Anyone is a single word. Anyone.
Okay, I will try to find it.
Sure.
By Andre who?
Andre Launay, Launay. Andre Launay.
Anyone for Chess.
Yes, it's like $15.98 on Amazon.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. There's also winning moves games. Called No Stress Chess, which is really good.
Yeah,
for 7 years old.
These days
that's
there's
a great way to learn.
these days there's so many books. It's like, but because I'm not a
Oh,
kid
it's
anymore, so I haven't really got myself into some of these books. But maybe I will someday.
Yeah, it's not a book. It's more like it's like a no stress check. And so I'll send you the link so that if you have a 7-year-old, you can really have them learn. And basically, it's a deck of cards with moves. And then when you pick up the card, it'll say move the rook, and then you move your rook, and then the other opponent will move. Will pick up another card, and it'll say move your queen. So what it does is it kind of it's an easier way to learn it if you were with a beginner that you're trying to get interested in chess.
Also, it's useful to have a good chess program. So when I was a kid, we had Chess Master, which was a great program. It had a lot of like kids graphics and stuff that you could use. I don't know if Chess Master is still around, but that's a nice computer program to play chess with. It was I guess the last one that came out was for Windows XP, and they haven't upgraded it since then. But that was
what is it? What is it called?
Chess Master.
Can maybe put something up later in the recording?
Yeah.
Windows E. What is it called?
It's called Chess Master 10th edition, but it's an old one. But it was really entertaining, I must say. I don't know if it can work on some of the newer computers, but maybe you can find a way to get it to work.
Software, I see it.
Yeah.
I see it.
It was pretty entertaining, and there's a lot of nice stuff for kids there and so on. So
yeah,
that was
I see
helpful.
it. Chess Master 10th edition.
Correct.
PC video game.
Yes.
Cool. All right. Let me put it into the chat so I can find it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was really useful. Thank you so much for all these resources and the books that you mentioned. I'll definitely take a look at.
Yeah. All right. See you next time then.
Okay, see
All
you
right.
next time.
Take care.
The PC game as well, so then you can share it later in your YouTube recording. And I look forward to seeing this uploaded and a review with my son.
Yeah. All right. Have a good night.
Okay.
Bye.